You know, of all the royal stories, there's something about the Queen Mother's rubies that I find endlessly fascinating. We think we know them so well. We see that magnificent tiara, and we picture her, the nation's beloved matriarch. We see those little flower brooches, and we have a story for them too. But what's so wonderful is that for almost all of them, the story we think we know isn't the whole story. There's a grand ruby tiara that, believe it or not, began its life with no rubies at all. A famous pair of floral clips that for 70 years were mistaken for something they weren't, and a beautiful bow brooch that was passed to her daughter, Princess Margaret, and then, well, it simply vanished from public view. So today, I thought we could sit down and unravel these lovely mysteries together, because this isn't just a story about jewels. It's the story of a woman who was never meant to be queen, and how her rubies became silent witnesses to her incredible life. And I think you'll find its true story holds some wonderful surprises. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. So let's go back to the 1920s. Before they were king and queen, they were the Duke and Duchess of York. A young, stylish, and by royal standards, relatively private couple. And it's in these early years of their marriage that we see the first of her rubies appear, not as grand state jewels, but as truly personal, thoughtful gifts. Between 1923 and 1925, for birthdays and Christmases, the Duke gave his wife a set of 5 beautiful bracelets from Cartier. It wasn't one single gift, but a collection built over time, which I think makes it all the more charming. They are pure Art Deco, so chic and modern for their time. One was set with those deep velvety sapphires, another with bright emeralds, and one, of course, with vibrant rubies. To complete the set, there were 2 more bracelets paved entirely with brilliant, glittering diamonds. And when you look at the early portraits of the Duchess, you can see how she loved them. She wore them exactly as they were intended to be worn in that era, stacked together on one arm. It's such a fashionable, almost relaxed look. You get a real sense of her as a young woman in step with the times, enjoying these beautiful things from her husband. And she clearly had a wonderful eye for style because she saw even more potential in them. It was the Duchess herself who went back to Cartier with a rather clever idea. She commissioned a special frame that would allow her to take 3 of the bracelets and wear them together as a bandeau in her hair. It was such a brilliant piece of design, her idea, executed by Cartier. It gave her this sleek, modern tiara, completely in tune with the Art Deco fashion of the moment, and she wore it often in those years, this piece that was both a loving gift and a product of her own taste. It really paints a picture of their life then, doesn't it? They were, of course, public figures with significant duties, but their position was one step removed from the direct, relentless spotlight that always follows the heir to the throne. It was a life they loved and one they expected to continue. But history, as we know, had other plans, and in 1936, with the abdication of his brother, the Duke of York's world, and his wife's, was about to change, completely and irrevocably. The era of personal, fashionable jewels was about to give way to the demands of a crown. So, in the wake of the abdication, Elizabeth is suddenly queen consort. And with that came a very practical and very public challenge. She needed jewels that truly looked the part. Her own collection was beautiful, personal, and fashionable, but for a state opening of Parliament or a coronation banquet, you need something with history, with weight. You need jewels that speak of majesty. The complication was that her mother-in-law, the formidable Queen Mary, was still very much present. And as the previous queen, she retained her own spectacular personal collection, which included many of the most famous royal jewels. So, for the new queen, the question was, what was available? The answer lay in the royal vaults, among the pieces designated not as personal property, but as heirlooms of the crown. And out of the vaults came this magnificent creation, the Oriental Circlet, or, as it's more accurately called, the Indian Circlet, and it was deemed the perfect, suitably grand tiara for a new queen empress. Now, this is where the story gets truly fascinating, because to understand why this particular tiara became so central to the Queen Mother's identity, why she would wear it for the rest of her long life, weaving it into her very image, we really need to appreciate the journey it took to get to her. It wasn't just a jewel, it was a chronicle of love, a legal drama, and a story of changing tastes. So let's pause her story for a moment in 1937 and travel all the way back to its very beginning. It all starts, as so many beautiful things did, with Prince Albert. And the first thing to picture is that the magnificent ruby tiara we associate so strongly with the Queen Mother looked nothing like it does today. It was born without a single ruby in it. In 1853, inspired by the Mughal art he'd championed at the Great Exhibition, Prince Albert designed this incredible circlet for Queen Victoria. It was a masterpiece of diamonds and opals, his absolute favorite gemstone. And it wasn't just the tiara. To go with it, the couple acquired a full matching parure from Gerard, a magnificent opal and diamond necklace, earrings, and a brooch. So what we have is this complete, beautiful suite of jewels, all shimmering with the milky fire of opals, all born from love and a shared passion for art. But what happens next is one of those strange twists of royal history. Just a few years after it was made, a long-standing legal dispute came to a head. The Hanoverian branch of the family won the rights to jewels that had belonged to a previous queen, Queen Charlotte. This meant every single stone in the royal collection had to be scrutinized, and it turned out that a significant number of diamonds used in the Indian Circlet had been taken from those very jewels. So, incredibly, the tiara had to be partly dismantled. The Hanoverian diamonds were removed and sent to Germany. Gerard had to go back to work, remaking the circlet at considerable cost. It was also at this point that it was altered slightly, so it was no longer a complete closed circle. The tiara had barely been returned to Queen Victoria when tragedy struck. In 1861, Prince Albert died suddenly. Victoria was heartbroken. For the next 40 years of her life, she wore mourning black, putting away her colored gems. And so, the Indian Circlet, Prince Albert's beautiful creation, was put away in the vaults. She would never wear it again. In her will, she designated it an heirloom of the crown for future queens to wear. The next in line was Queen Alexandra, but she had a very different taste. She simply didn't like opals. In fact, she thought they were unlucky. So, in 1902, she sent the entire parure back to Gerard. The opals in the tiara, the necklace, and the earrings were all taken out. In their place, she had them set with a collection of splendid Burmese rubies, a historic gift given to Queen Victoria decades earlier. She also had the tiara made a little smaller. And then, after all that work, she seems to have almost never worn it. Her successor, Queen Mary, was perhaps the greatest jewelry connoisseur the family has ever known. Yet, there are no photographs of her wearing the tiara either, but she didn't ignore the set completely. With her characteristic eye for detail, she noticed one piece was out of sync. She took the final piece of the original set, the brooch, which still had its opal, and had it set with rubies to match everything else. And so, the transformation was complete. It was now a magnificent, perfectly matched ruby parure, a suite of jewels designed by a prince, dismantled by law, shelved by grief, and completely reborn in rubies, that for decades nobody seemed to wear. It sat in the vaults waiting for the right person at the right moment in history to bring it back into the light, and in 1937, that person was the new Queen Elizabeth. It traveled with her on those crucial pre-war state visits to France in 1938 and Canada in 1939. It became her symbol of majesty in those final, fragile years of peace. But its time in the spotlight was destined to be brief. As the world edged closer to conflict, the brightest jewels of the crown would soon have to be hidden away from view. But as the grand tiaras disappeared into wartime storage, the Queen Mother faced a delicate balance. Unlike many who felt that displays of luxury were inappropriate during wartime, she held a very different philosophy about her public role. She famously said that if people came to see her at Buckingham Palace, they would put on their finest clothes to show respect. Therefore, she felt she should extend the same courtesy when visiting her subjects, appearing before them in her best as a mark of honor to them. This wasn't about vanity or disregard for wartime hardships. It was about dignity, respect, and the symbolic power of the monarchy to provide hope and continuity. And so, throughout the war years, she continued to wear beautiful jewels, understanding that sometimes a touch of sparkle could lift spirits in the darkest of times. The war years had also brought an extraordinary windfall to the Queen Mother's personal collection. In 1942, she inherited a spectacular cache of jewels from Dame Margaret Greville, a collection that included some of the most magnificent pieces ever owned by a private individual. The Greville bequest transformed the Queen Mother's jewelry box overnight, adding tiaras, necklaces, bracelets, and brooches of museum-quality craftsmanship. For decades, royal jewelry enthusiasts and historians alike believed that among these inherited treasures was a particularly charming pair of ruby and diamond flower brooches. The clips seemed to fit perfectly with the quality and style of the other Greville pieces, and this assumption went unchallenged for over 70 years. But in 2015, everything we thought we knew about these brooches changed. Royal jewelry historian Christophe Vachaudès, given access to Cartier's archives, revealed a completely different story. The clips had not come from the Greville bequest at all. Instead, they had been commissioned by the Queen Mother herself in November 1943, using her own diamonds and rubies. Working with Frederick Mew, Cartier London's chief designer for over 4 decades, she had created something beautiful from her existing collection during wartime rationing. The design was exquisite, 2 mirrored clips, each featuring twin blossoms, one centered with a ruby, the other with a diamond framed by curved leaves. The choice of rubies may have carried special wartime significance. Throughout history, rubies have been associated with courage, passion, and protection, qualities that would resonate deeply during Britain's darkest hours. For a queen who saw herself as a beacon of hope for her people, commissioning ruby jewelry during wartime could have been a deliberate statement of strength and resilience. However, it's important to note that we don't know for certain whether the Queen Mother actually wore these brooches during the war years themselves. The earliest documented photographs of her wearing the clips date from 1947, but from that point forward, they became treasured additions to her collection. And there's another layer to this story, a detail found in those same Cartier records that makes it even more personal. The brooches weren't a standalone commission. They were specifically designed to complement a matching bracelet, ordered at the same time. The payment record from July 1944 confirms the entire project, an order for a fine ruby and diamond bracelet alongside the remounting of the Queen's own stones into the pair of clips. But here's where a rather charming little puzzle emerges for jewelry watchers. While the existence of this companion bracelet is confirmed, its exact identity has never been officially stated. Cartier created a matching bracelet, but which one was it? While we don't have a definitive confirmation, there is a very strong candidate. Throughout the following years, the Queen Mother was often seen wearing a beautiful Art Deco-style bracelet made of alternating diamond plaques with a ruby center and ruby plaques with a diamond center. The style works beautifully with the clips. And most tellingly, she frequently wore them together. You can see it here at a wedding in Westminster Abbey in 1951. She has pinned both clips together on her dress, and on her wrist is that very bracelet. She clearly saw them as a set, and she continued to pair this bracelet not only with the clips, but also with her other major ruby jewels, like the Indian Circlet. It's a compelling theory, but adding to the mystery, this beautiful bracelet seems to have vanished from public view. It hasn't been seen since the Queen Mother's death. It was presumably inherited by Queen Elizabeth II, and, after her passing, would now belong to His Majesty the King. I do hope we see it emerge from the vaults one day, perhaps on the wrist of Queen Camilla. It would be wonderful to have this little mystery solved. What do you think? Do you suppose this is the bracelet that completes the set? The war ended. The Cartier clips and their mysterious companion bracelet had become these silent witnesses to the Queen's quiet strength. But what of those magnificent rubies, the ones from the Indian Circlet that had been hidden away in the vaults? When they were finally brought back out into the daylight of a world at peace, their meaning and the Queen's relationship with them had changed forever. The Indian Circlet, along with its magnificent matching necklace, earrings, and brooch, became a cornerstone of her public image. They were no longer just symbols of imperial grandeur for state visits. For a nation that had endured so much, they were now something more. They became a vivid link, a brilliant red bridge between the hardships of the war and the hope for a new era of peace and rebuilding. And in the years that followed, Queen Elizabeth made this parure emphatically her own. Throughout the late 1940s and into the early 50s, the full suite of crown rubies became a familiar and dazzling sight. She wore the tiara, necklace, and earrings for the most important state occasions and gala performances. We see them in the official portrait used for a stamp commemorating her silver wedding anniversary in 1948, a major national celebration. The complete ruby parure became one of the defining images of her time as queen consort, a signature choice that radiated both majesty and warmth. She wore them so often and with such natural grace that the jewels and the woman became inextricably linked in the public imagination, long before she became the Queen Mother. Then, in 1952, her world changed again with the sudden death of King George VI. Now a widow, she became Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And this is where we find a really lovely telling detail about the relationship between her and her daughter, the new Queen Elizabeth II. Technically, as heirlooms of the crown, the Indian Circlet and the entire crown ruby set should have passed directly to the new monarch upon her accession. They belonged to the sovereign, but the Queen, who had seen for years how much her mother loved these jewels and how central they were to her identity, made an extraordinary and touching gesture. She simply didn't ask for them back. She allowed her mother to continue to wear them for as long as she wished. There's a famous story of the young queen saying something to the effect of, "Mommy will give them back," trusting her mother's judgment completely. It was a profound act of love and respect. It acknowledged the Queen Mother's unique and enduring place in the nation's heart, allowing her to retain the symbols of majesty that she had worn with such strength and dignity for so many years. And in her new role, she would continue to do so for the next 50 years, forever cementing the image of the Queen Mother in her glorious rubies. And that association was so powerful, so absolute, that it seems to have cast a long shadow. When the circlet and its matching jewels finally returned to the main royal collection after the Queen Mother's death in 2002, Queen Elizabeth II wore the tiara only once for a state visit to Malta in 2005, just one single time. One can't help but wonder why. Perhaps, in a way, the tiara was too much her mother's. To wear it often might have felt like borrowing a signature piece, and Queen Elizabeth II had spent a lifetime carefully cultivating her own iconic image with other tiaras. There's also a very practical consideration. By the time she inherited the Indian Circlet, the Queen had already had her own grand ruby tiara, the Burmese, for nearly 30 years, commissioned to fill that very gap in her collection. We've seen this pattern continue. Queen Camilla, when choosing a ruby tiara for a state occasion, also selected the Burmese ruby tiara, so the Indian Circlet remains in the vaults. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is history repeating itself? Is this magnificent tiara, having had its glorious more than half-century reign with the Queen Mother, now destined for another long rest, just as it did after Queen Victoria's death? Will we only see it at exhibitions for a generation, waiting for the right person to bring it back into the light once more? And while this parure was her grandest ruby statement, her collection continued to be enriched by other ruby gifts, each marking a new chapter in her long life. And one of the most charming examples of this next chapter comes from 1958. By now, the Queen Mother had fully embraced her new public role. She was traveling the world, this incredibly beloved figure representing the crown and the Commonwealth. Let's picture the scene. She's on a major tour of Australia, and as a mark of the country's deep affection, she is presented with a gift from the Australian people. It was a beautiful brooch of 2 entwined hibiscus flowers, their petals traced in glittering diamonds with vibrant rubies at their hearts. She was, by all accounts, absolutely delighted with it. There was no waiting for the right occasion. She began wearing it immediately. The Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, presented it to her at a dinner one evening, and the very next morning, she wore it to church, pinned perfectly to a dress patterned with pink roses that picked up the color of the rubies. But perhaps the most memorable and quintessentially Australian image of her wearing the brooch is that wonderful photograph of her, smiling as she cradles a koala. There she is, the picture of warmth and regal grace, with this symbol of Australia's affection sparkling on her shoulder. The hibiscus brooch became a symbol of this new phase of her life. It represented the deep, personal connection she had forged with the people of the Commonwealth. Since then, the hibiscus has become a regular part of the Queen's rotation, appearing most often for Commonwealth events and when she wears red or pink. And alongside these gifts with clear public histories, her collection also contained pieces with stories that are far more mysterious. One of the most intriguing is a beautiful piece known as the Ruby Bouquet brooch. It's a delicate spray of diamond and ruby blooms tied with a sparkling bow. This brooch seemingly appeared out of nowhere in her later years. With no documented provenance, we don't know if it was a gift, a purchase, or something else entirely. What we do know is that she considered it worthy of her grandest occasions, pairing it with the magnificent crown rubies. After her death, the mystery continued. The brooch passed to Queen Elizabeth II, who wore it on several high-profile occasions, yet its origins remain unknown. And the ruby bouquet wasn't the only enigmatic floral brooch in her collection. There's another, this one a more compact, stylized bloom with a single, vibrant ruby at its center, surrounded by diamond petals. Like the bouquet, its origins are a complete mystery. We know it belonged to the Queen Mother, who wore it on occasion, but its history before her is lost. And then, for years after she passed away, this little flower also wasn't seen. That is, until 2012. In a wonderful surprise for royal jewelry watchers, Camilla, then the Duchess of Cornwall, appeared wearing it for a special service at Westminster Abbey celebrating the bicentenary of Charles Dickens's birth. And while some mysteries are solved by a surprise appearance, the story of her magnificent ruby bow brooch is a little more complicated. We see the Queen Mother wearing this striking bow during the French state visit in 1950, where the diamonds formed graceful loops with rubies adding her signature flash of color. Later, the same distinctive brooch appeared on Princess Margaret. The natural assumption, of course, is that it was a gift from mother to daughter. But the plot thickens when we look at the famous auction of Princess Margaret's jewels after her death. The bow wasn't in it. And that's the strange part. It makes you wonder, why would her children sell other, more personal items from their mother, but hold on to this one large, dramatic bow? Unless they couldn't. Which brings us to a second, very neat theory. What if it was never a gift at all, but simply a loan from her mother? That would explain everything. After Margaret's passing, it would have quietly returned to the Queen Mother's estate, then to Queen Elizabeth II, and would now be with King Charles, safe in the vaults. So, what do you think? And there's yet another mysterious piece that deserves mention, a substantial ruby bracelet that the Queen Mother wore frequently, particularly when she wanted to create a complete ruby ensemble with the crown rubies. Looking at the photographs, this was clearly a statement piece, a wide, substantial bracelet featuring alternating sections of diamonds and rubies in what appears to be a geometric, possibly Art Deco-inspired design. The rubies appear to be set in rectangular or square configurations, interspersed with diamond sections, creating a bold, rhythmic pattern along the length of the bracelet. The Queen Mother seemed to consider this bracelet an essential part of her ruby repertoire. She wore it regularly when appearing in the full crown ruby parure, the Indian circlet, necklace, and earrings, treating it as a natural extension of that magnificent set. But here's what makes this bracelet particularly intriguing. Like the bow brooch we just discussed, it has completely vanished from public view since the Queen Mother's death in 2002. Despite being such a prominent piece in her collection, one she wore so frequently with her most important rubies, it hasn't been seen on any member of the royal family since. And so, when we look back at the story of the Queen Mother's rubies, it's clear they are so much more than just a collection of beautiful things. They are witnesses, from the intimate Art Deco bracelets that spoke of a young marriage, to the grand Indian circlet that had to find its purpose after war and widowhood, from the quiet defiance of the Cartier clips to the charming mysteries of her later brooches. Each jewel charts a chapter in her remarkable life. They tell a story of love, of duty, and of a quiet, unshakable resilience. It has been such a pleasure sharing these stories with you today, and now I would genuinely love to know what you think. We're left with so many wonderful puzzles. Do you believe the ruby bow brooch is a private family treasure, or is it waiting in the royal vaults to be seen again? And what about the magnificent Indian circlet? Will it have another long rest just as it did after Queen Victoria? Or is there a royal lady you think is destined to bring it back into the light? Please do share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading them. If you enjoyed diving into these stories with me, and you'd like to explore more of the history and mystery behind these incredible collections, I would be so pleased if you would consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for your time. Until next time.